Welcome back to the Malt Miller YouTube channel, Homebrewers. In this video, we're talking you through the things that Rob, Reiki and I all wish we'd known when we started homebrewing.
I think actually at this time of year it's really pertinent that we kind of discuss mistakes that we made at the beginning or tips and techniques that we've picked up along the way that actually we wished that we knew right at the beginning, because there's going to be loads of people out there that have been given starter kits or beer kits, something to do with homebrew as a gift, and we want to be able to make it as successful as possible, especially for your first attempt.
I mean, this is one of those conversations we have on a regular basis in the office. You know, we're answering customer service emails. Yeah. And if we could go back in time and learn some of the things that kind of we didn't know then that we do know now, but it's still a learning every day and every brew.
Definitely, and most of it, or very much of it, is very simple, just tweaks to process, just that can make the outcome of the beer totally different.
Right, should we dive into our very first one on this list that we think will make a massive difference to people that are just starting out on their home brewing journey?
One of the first things that you need to look at is the temperature at which you're fermenting your beer.
Yeah.
This can be different for different styles of beer. So if you're trying to make a lager, for example, we all know that lagers generally ferment at a much lower temperature, because if they ferment at room temperature, the yeast gives off flavors which you don't want in your final beer. Temperature control for fermentation is so important to the outcome.
It can make a huge difference to all styles of beer, you know, regardless of whether you're using ale yeasts, lager yeasts, or anything weird and wonderful in between. The first thing we have to understand is that yeast is a living organism, and it plays a crucial role in turning our wort, you know, our sugary liquid, into delicious beer. Looking after it, keeping it at a steady, stable temperature throughout that fermentation period. I think certainly for me, when I started looking after that, that was the biggest single leap I'd made in my home brewing journey at that early point. You know, I was probably about 6-7 months into brewing before I started thinking about controlling the fermentation temperature really precisely. You don't have to be like mega precise with it, but making sure it's not in an area where the temperature is going to fluctuate 3, 4, 5 degrees over the course of the day, because the heating's coming on and then the heating's going off and you're out of the house and the temperature drops. That kind of stuff, just keeping the yeast really happy, makes a massive difference to the flavour and the finish of that beer.
I mean, I was lucky when I got my first kit, it came with a heat belt. So that I was kind of on that route already. But like you say, controlling it properly, 6 months later, I kind of built a fermentation chamber with a fridge, with an ink bird, and that heat belt. And the quality of my beer just lifted.
It's really worth noting, though, that things have changed a lot with yeast over the last little while. So when I started homebrewing, high temperature yeast just weren't a thing. So actually the best advice that we can give now is, if you've been bought a beer kit and you're putting a beer on for the first time, read the instructions on the back of the yeast packet, because there's a massive range of temperatures now that yeast are suitable for. So just make sure that you read the instructions on the back of the packet and follow the temperature guidance that's given on the yeast.
I mean, one of the things I do remember while we're talking about yeast, it's kind of stuck in my head that someone said to me, the brewer makes wort, the yeast makes beer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's really important to treat that yeast with the respect it needs.
Moving on to number 2 on our list, and we're going to talk a little bit about water here. Now, don't get scared or tune out at this point, because we're not going to be going into loads and loads of detail about water in this video, but water really matters. And you can take some simple steps at home, regardless of whether you're brewing a beer kit or you're diving into all grain brewing, to make a difference to the water you're going to be using. If you're using tap water, you need to get rid of chlorine. That's the first and foremost thing, and it's dead easy to do. You can either leave the water to stand for 24 hours before you start brewing with it, or indeed you can add something like sodium metabisulfate, which is a really simple additive that we sell. Needs a tiny amount into that brewing water, flashes off the chlorine. That will undoubtedly improve the flavour of the finished beer.
One of the first steps I took, James, was the sodium metabisulfite. But then I kind of found that I was losing hop flavour, so the hops would drop out after a couple of weeks. So the first step I then made into kind of changing my water was simply went out and bought bottled water from Tesco's. Ashbeck water, really neutral, really great for hoppy beers.
Yeah, really good for hoppy beers. It's got such a low mineral content across all the parameters. You really can notably, again, taste the difference.
Actually, it's cheap as chips as well. So to actually use that Ashbeck water for your total water volume, it adds hardly anything to the cost of a brew per pint. Next up, let's look at equipment. Now, there is a vast range of equipment on the market at almost any price point. Some equipment, some automated equipment, some really shiny stainless steel equipment, which is really at the higher end of the price point, doesn't necessarily make better beer. It might make some processes easier, but there's absolutely no reason why you can't make competition-winning beer using really basic equipment, and that's proved time and time again with competitions that we're involved in and competitions that we're judging. It's you that's making the beer. That's not to say that some equipment in some processes make things easier.
I mean, we learnt about actually the origins of Verdant when we went down and spent a couple of days with them. They started brewing in their kitchen in a big old stock pot with malt extract, and were bottle conditioning those beers. Look at them now, right? Yes, it's grown, it's changed, they've advanced, their equipment has advanced, but all that equipment has been bought and developed to help them with the processes, rather than actually it's the equipment that makes the beer. It's you as the brewer.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I've been brewing for 10 years now. I'm still using plastic buckets as well as shiny stainless steel. There's a place for it within my brewing kit. One of the things I kind of remember when I think back to when I started was those first few brews. Although they weren't the best beers I've ever made, well, actually, probably the worst beers I've ever made, to be totally honest, but getting those under your belt is so important to teach you the steps, to teach you cleanliness, sanitization, all of those little pieces that kind of bring the jigsaw of homebrewing together.
Yeah, just learning the processes, you know, if you're jumping into all grain brewing, learning mashing and how to dough in and not get dough balls, and maintaining your mash temperature, all of those things that sound a bit daunting. Well, the only way to learn is through experience, right?
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is you can also kind of choose recipes that suit those first few brews, those with a few less steps in there, without a big 200 gram dry hop in there maybe.
Yeah, I think actually that's a really important point. Being in a position where, you might be getting into homebrewing because you want to brew big 8% IPAs with a ton of hops that are really soft and juicy, right? That's awesome. It's a really good goal to have in mind. The reality is your first brew isn't going to be that, because that's a more advanced brewing technique. And if you want to get to that point, doing some simpler brews and getting used to the processes, learning and growing, that's what maybe 4, 5, 6 brews down the line gives you the confidence to then have a go at brewing something bigger and more complex and a bit more challenging, right?
It's also really important to actually break down the brewing process. Brewing beer is not just about making the wort, it's about getting the beer into the glass. So we have to think about it backwards from there. You can make the best wort ever and then screw it up during fermentation. Well, you can have the best fermentation anyway. It tastes absolutely awesome out of the fermenter, and then you completely screw it up packaging. And that's something else that we see. So it's not just making the wort, it's making the wort, fermenting it, and getting it into the final packaging, so that when you're actually drinking it, you're drinking a real quality product.
Yeah, and it's what you intended at the beginning of that brew day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those mistakes at the first stage, if you're choosing overcomplicated recipes, they're going to be a more costly mistake.
Yeah, sure. So I've made an absolutely awesome beer. I'm absolutely delighted with it. I want to make it again.
Sorry, you're not just talking about the beer that you made that's in this glass then? This is anecdotal.
This is an outstanding beer, absolutely, without a doubt, and I am absolutely delighted with it. And by the way, it was made on the simplest equipment pretty much that we do. So yeah, I'm delighted with that. Anyway, back on topic. So I want to make this beer again. And to do that, I'm going to read back the notes that I made, the copious notes that I made whilst I was brewing it. And if I hadn't have made those notes, I'd be screwed, because I wouldn't know temperatures, I wouldn't know volumes. And as I can also ideally put a certain amount of liquid into a mash tun and generally know exactly how much liquid I'm going to get out, but I'm only going to know exactly how much I got out if I noted it down. Moving forward, it's really, really important that you make as many notes as possible so that you can refer back to it, you can fine-tune your system, fine-tune your recipe.
Yeah, something I like to do is, make some general observations as well. So whilst I'm writing down things like what the gravities I got were at different points, how much liquid I managed to actually collect at the end of the brew day, whatever it might be, I also like to make some general notes, like what did the wort smell and taste like after I'd taken my sample for a gravity reading? Because again, sampling your beer right throughout the brewing process from the point when you finished mashing and boiling all the way through fermentation teaches you, right?
Yeah.
And you can look back and go, okay, well actually at that point I was getting this kind of flavour from that wort. Did that show up in the finished beer? And if it was something that I was really delighted with, well, I'll do that again, or I'll try and pinpoint what it was that created that experience.
Actually, James, it goes further than that. So with the tasting, I like to taste a bit of the malt before it actually goes in the mash tun. I like to really, really sniff the hops and try to describe exactly what aromas I'm getting from the hops to see if that travels through the beer making process. And when you're fermenting any product, but when we're looking at beer, when you're fermenting beer, what you're actually doing is taking sugar out of it. And it's quite amazing what a flavour enhancer sugar is and how it becomes more bitter as you take the sugar out of it by fermentation and just the developing flavours. And to write notes on that, it just helps you develop those skills of knowing what's going on in your beer during the process. It's a really handy tool.
I used to have like this little black notebook which I kind of wrote down all my recipe, because I was kind of writing them down in that. This was before using software, and I'd write in there mashing temperatures, mash time, time it took for the sparge to be completed and to go through, just so I could kind of say next time I do it, oh, that took a different amount of time, what did I do differently? Not having all of those notes was really useful. Today, I'm using free software to program my recipe in, but again, I've still got a printout of that sheet or an area on that recipe sheet to kind of make notes of what changes each time I brew it.
The one that absolutely stands out to me that I wish I had known more about when I started homebrewing was diacetyl. Now, diacetyl is an off flavour that it generally shows up in hoppy beers, but also in kind of like lagers and that kind of stuff, and it's distinct.
It can be absolutely heartbreaking, can't it, James? Diacetyl. Yeah,
it can. It's a flavour that comes across as like butterscotch or Werther's Originals, Butterkist popcorn, that kind of thing. Buttery, sweet, unpleasant, and it's a byproduct of fermentation, which if the correct processes are followed, the yeast will clear up itself. It's dead simple to do. We've got some videos on that, which we'll put some links up here, but I wish I'd known about it, because one of the things I wanted to do when I started homebrewing was brew hoppy beers. It's the thing that got me into homebrewing, and I remember some of those really early like hop beers that I'd made, like single hop beers, crack them open, crack the bottle open,
and rather more recently as well, James.
Yes. Okay.
That Butterkist popcorn toffee taste.
Yes.
You love it. Well, you don't love it now, do you?
No, I hate it.
Yes.
But it is dead easy to get over, and just time and patience is really the key to it.
And using the right quantity of yeast.
Yeah, using the right quantity of yeast
And time.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, but
And packaging beer correctly.
Not rushing it.
Not rushing it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Should we change the subject?
Yeah, diacetyl anyway. It's a really important subject. It's something that's really close to James's heart.
We might let him forget it next year.
Yeah, we may do.
feel free, message me on any social media platform and I'll tell you the story.
Another enemy, James, oxygen. You're talking about hoppy beers. Oxygen and hoppy beers do not mix.
Right, And oxygen and light lagers don't mix.
No, you know, it can ruin any beer if you're not careful. You know, if you think back to when we were homebrewing and we didn't know that much at the start, it's kind of like sloshing a jug of wort around, you know, transferring from one vessel to the other.
Yeah,
you
I
know,
won't bother siphoning
pumping
that
air with
over,
your siphon, you know. All of these things, man, they can really wreck a great beer.
Yeah.
You know, give it that kind of cardboardy, kind of horrible, nasty taste. Turn it mud brown.
Yeah. But that first New England that I made, which was to do all Kashmir New England.
God, that's going back.
Yeah. That was the first one I made at home. Loads of whole leaf Kashmir in it. And I remember packaging it and I was bottling it, using a bottling stick, being really gentle. And I got a load bottle and it was really pleased, but it started to get blocked in the bottling stick because there was like hot matter and yeast and stuff in there. Anyway, I remember half of the batch was actually really encouraging. The other half of the batch was just
Muddy pond
filthy,
water.
grey, awful. And it just so happened that I brought some of that half that was horrendous in and gave it to you, I think, Rob.
So taking steps to minimise the oxygen contact with the beer once fermentation started is massively important. Generally relatively easy to do, and actually this jumps back to some of the equipment as well, because some of the more advanced equipment, it is easier to keep oxygen away from your beer. Cleaning. Now, we're not going to sit here and bang on for ages about how clean your equipment has to be whilst you're homebrewing, because there's 1,000 other videos that are talking about that, and it's not exactly a fascinating subject. But what I would say is we need to look at the cleaning and sanitizing as two separate processes. So we have to make sure our equipment is clean first, especially on the cold side. But that doesn't mean to say we have to overlook a valve in a kettle, because I don't want last brew's hot material still in the valve of my kettle. I need to make sure that that's clean. But the sanitizing, that needs to be treated as a separate step. So one chemical for cleaning, another chemical for sanitizing, two separate steps.
Well, the other thing as well is, you know, many of us started out home brewing maybe in our garage or in a shed or somewhere like that. And
Yeah, they're generally not clean environments, are they?
your gear gets packed away for a little bit and then you pull it back out to do your next brew. You know, you may well have cleaned it before it went away, but actually we've all been there where we open up a kettle or a fermenter lid that we thought was clean, and then kind of inside,
Mank.
you've got some friends growing in there.
Yeah.
So adding in a little bit of extra time at the beginning of your brew day just to make sure all the gear that you're going to be using is really clean, because ultimately you're going to be drinking what you make at the end of it. So you want it to be clean and sanitary.
Putting equipment away once it's fully dry is it helps massively. If you put something away in a shed that's damp or wet, it's not going to help.
I think also the attention to detail on that cleaning, you know, not to go too much into it, but I've got recollections of I had batch after batch spoil on me.
Yeah.
And it was down to I didn't do thorough enough cleaning. I had a tap on a fermenter.
Yeah.
Within that, I didn't know you could take the tap apart, break it apart, get in there, thoroughly clean it out. I had some really nasty growing in there,
they
and
get
I
manky.
lost a lot of batches because of that.
Yeah. Hopefully that gives you a few hints and tips and makes you more confident to get your first brew on. This is just part one. Join us again in part two, where we look at a few more advanced techniques.
Now, if you're not already, please do subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out. Hit the bell for notifications as well, so that actually next week when we launch part two of this video, you can tune in straight away and not miss out on any of the other content that we've got coming up for you on our channel. Please also check out our other social feeds. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and also if you want, you can sign up to our newsletter down below in the description. Have a great brew. Cheers.